Against the backdrop of a scary global health pandemic, Kenyans have now experienced 2 days of a daily 10-hour curfew aimed at curbing the spread of the coronavirus outbreak. However, what the country has experienced in the first nationwide curfew in more than 40 years is an unfortunate case of a national police service crossing the thin blue line and infringing on the people's rights. From the General Service Unit, officers rounding people up at the Likoni ferry crossing in the county of Mombasa 2 hours before the curfew, tear gassing, beating them up, and stacking them up like sardines, all against the all-important social distancing principle, to a woman with an ailing child being beaten senseless, and journalists seen as providing essential services being harassed by police officers live on camera. It is not how police officers are supposed to enforce a curfew. I will support efforts by the government and continue to urge Kenyans to follow state directives to the letter to stop the spread of the coronavirus. We take great exception to the manner in which law enforcement agencies have been enforcing the curfew. It is cruel and unwarranted for police officers to place a heavy hand on the very people that they swore to protect. This is a global pandemic that has strained every facet of this country, not least the transport sector, which means that some Kenyans are bound to miss the curfew. Do those baton-happy police officers even know why they are enforcing the curfew? We urge restraint from the disciplined forces. The novel coronavirus is the enemy, not Kenyans trying to survive the virus. I'm Ben Kitili, live from the KTN News Center. This is Inside Politics. Stay with us for the next 120 minutes as we try to dissect the biggest political and policy issues in the Republic, but of course the main thing being the coronavirus pandemic. Now, police brutality, disorder, fear and anarchy is what characterized the first night of the curfew in Kenya. Scenes that were witnessed drew the conversation away from the current coronavirus pandemic and reminisced the never-changing image of the National Police Service. In the fight between good and bad, it is the police who enforce the rules. But what happens when police cross the line? KTN's Crimes and Investigations editor Hussein Mohammed paints the grim picture of what we call the National Police Service as witnessed Friday.
As the hour drew closer, KTN News, just like many Kenyans, witnessed tens and tens of Kenyans stranded as there were no public service vehicles to take them home. In Mombasa Likoni crossing, poor Kenyans who have to work to survive were left seemingly captive in their own country. As the night kicked in Nairobi's Eastleigh area, onlookers recorded this video. Plainclothes police officers roughly eject a driver from his car, viciously beating him as they chase him away. All this while, onlookers pleading with the officers to have mercy on the lone driver. The presumed officers never identified themselves to the driver. This video adding to a series of others that have become the hallmark of a service turning back to a force. This was the norm for the better part of the night in various towns in the country. In Nakuru, the rogue nature of the police was captured in the flu glare of cameras. A lorry driver ferrying foodstuffs is captured pleading with police and explaining that he is an essential service group exempted from the curfew. But the explanations were met with a brutal beating. His colleagues were not spared in the night of violence and show of might to a people the police is mandated by law to protect. The protectors of life and property breaking the law without an iota of shame or second thought. This night guard was asked to give out his phone as officers harassed him. He was stationed at his place of work. Never mind, private security officers are listed in the presidential order as people offering essential services.
I'm also urging our police that people should be treated humanely.
Mombasa was the epitome of police brutality. Poor Kenyans were treated to a night of terror. fear and agony. At the Likoni ferry crossing 2 hours before the curfew hours, police officers in Mombasa not only roughed up the residents, but ordered women to lie down in water after being tear-gassed. Social distancing, hygiene, health issues were not a concern for the officers. In every way, how police treated these non-violent Kenyans, grouping them together and lobbing tear gas at them, resulting in running battles and stampedes, bet every intention as to why President Uhuru Kenyatta declared the curfew. If there was a day when most Kenyans would have contracted the coronavirus, that day was yesterday. That is if they did not. Local journalists going about their duties were not spared. An NTV journalist is seen here being assaulted by a police officer. These are regrettable scenes that depict brutal colonialism happening to a country over 50 years after independence.
There is no point to use so much force. Lakini mwananchi naye afate waweze kupatiwa ile nidhamu inaoweza kufaa katika wakati huu.
Polisi isiwe ino ni tumo ya kwamba sasa tumepata mrija wa kuchukua pesa kwa wananchi, kwa vijana kwa sababu kuna hiyo curfew.
Back in Nairobi, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority has promised investigations, condemning the lawlessness unleashed by the law enforcers. The paradox of a lifetime that has normalized in this country. IPOA has asked the police to enforce the curfew within the confines of the law.
We are shocked to learn that these actions, this violence took place 2 hours before the 7 o'clock deadline of the curfew.
We call upon the Cabinet Secretary to also include legal services as essential services during this period.
For people who have never witnessed a curfew, for police officers who mostly have never enforced a curfew, pictures witnessed last night paints the grim reality of the backwardness of service delivery of the police. The curfew was meant to protect Kenyans against the coronavirus and not to spread fear, pain and panic, but it mostly did the latter. Hussein Mohammed, KTN News in Nairobi.
Welcome to the broadcast. Let's get right into it. I am joined in studio by Dismas Mokua, political risk analyst, Jerutich Sei, humanitarian and development consultant, as well as Mark BICHACHI, communication strategist, and KIPCHUMBA KARORI, lawyer and political strategist. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me, as always, as we try to keep our distance, to try to instill that social distancing principle. Thank you for joining me. Let me start with you, Jerutich. What is your reaction to what happened on Friday? A lot of Kenyans, expressing their anger over the manner in which the police are enforcing this daily curfew.
Thank you and good morning, Ben. When I think about the fact that corporal punishment even has been outlawed in schools and for a while, I think about the indignity that grown people, men and women, are subjected to by the type of violence that has been meted out on them during this curfew enforcement. It's terrible. It is dehumanizing. The loss of dignity. I was shuddering again just watching those sticks land on the backs of grown-ups who are supposed to go home and take care of their children, continue to fend for their families even in the time of corona. But let me take a little bit of a step back. The police are the end product of a chain of lies, as I will call them, from the administration and poor planning. Look, if you announce a curfew 2 days before it's actually going to happen without a very clear rollout plan, the police and law enforcement and armed servicemen and women will revert to their default settings that were honed during colonial times, which is violence to enforce an order. So when you do not call a series of consultative planning meetings leading up to the time that the curfew kicks in, there will be chaos. And in the chaos that ensues, people are injured. I read somewhere on social media that a woman lost her baby. She bled. A pregnant woman was beaten so bad she lost her baby. We're going to see chaos, mayhem, anarchy. And in the midst of all of that, opportunists will step in. Because if police are stealing mobile phones from people who are legally allowed to be outside in the night, what's to stop me from saying I'm a disenfranchised young person with no source of livelihood? There is chaos because nobody knows what's going on, and I will take opportunity and advantage of this moment to also steal. So you will have this pot, this stirring pot of violence, where ultimately the people who are supposed to be protected by the government of Kenya will lose out.
Dismas, we have been very consistent, even here on this show, to try and tell Kenyans to follow government directives on what they should be doing in this time of the coronavirus pandemic to the letter. But we have to take exception in the manner in which the police are enforcing this curfew.
Well, you know, when you look at the policing, the concepts, the philosophy of policing, our policing is supposed to be modeled on the British philosophy. That is policing by consent. That our policemen are merely citizens in uniform. And when you look at the 9 principles of consent policing from the UK, principle number 6 says that in your day-to-day business, you're supposed to be diplomatic, you be persuasive, you give advice. If you have to use force, you use the bare minimum force to implement the rule of law and order. And what we saw happening was not the use of the bare minimum force. I mean, obviously, again, it would be really naive of us to condemn the entire police service, because we saw some policemen in Baringo did a very good job. But the few pictures that we saw were terrifying, and one wonders whether the Inspector General of Police, in fact, has taken any action. And in my view, the policemen need to be educated to understand the philosophy behind the curfew. That this curfew is supposed to break that chain of the coronavirus. The policemen are not supposed to catalyze the coronavirus in Kenya. And what they did in Mombasa was a sure way of catalyzing. Because you see, the moment you throw up a tear gas and you interfere with the people's organs, they start coughing. So somebody who had even alerted coronavirus, it will come out and infect everything. And one would have expected that the president, Dr. Matiang'i, and the Inspector General of Police would have condemned those acts in the strongest terms possible, discipline the people who took advantage of the curfew to beat up Kenyans, and reward this policeman from Baringo who came up, was giving people a sanitizer and, you know, talking to them, persuading them, giving them advice on the do's and don'ts. It's unacceptable for policemen. You know, like you saw before the curfew, there were clips on social media, policemen doing press-ups, you know, doing those war hymns. It's as if they had been given the opportunity to come and beat up Kenyans. They should be using that energy to beat the coronavirus.
Mark, the curfew has been described as a relic of colonial behavior. What is your take on what happened in Mombasa, especially on Friday, where every man and his dog knows that you should keep your distance? That is one of the basic principles in order to avoid spreading, you know, this virus. But we saw police officers rounding, you know, Kenyans up, stacking up like potatoes next to each other. I mean, that is just, what do you think about that?
You know, what happened in Mombasa is so indefensible, and it reminds me of the old police saying that the enemy of the police is the raia, is the common citizen. And that was what was on obvious display in Mombasa. And as Jerotich said, this is a total failure of the government in implementing the curfew, forgetting the need for getting stakeholders to participate in it and to be aware of what is supposed to happen. And by stakeholders, I mean a wide range of Kenyans. Let's start with employers, for example. At what time are employers supposed to let people go home? Because in Nairobi, if someone lets you go home at 4 and you live in Utawala or Rongata Rongai, then you're definitely going to get stuck. But the police reaction, I am sympathizing with the people who are beaten, but I'm also agreeing with Jerotich when she says they had to resort back to their default setting, which has always been to make the public the enemy. Now, we need to do a quick rollback of what has happened and remind the police that they have a diplomatic role to play. And there is a way of talking to Kenyans without using violence. And violence should only be as a matter of last resort. But at the same time, I don't think we've used the voices of our leaders enough to sensitize the people of the importance of this curfew. Let's remember one thing. There are employers who are still making people sit in very cramped conditions. There are employers who are not letting their staff go home on time. And all of these pressures will lead to more chaos at every 7 p.m.
Okay.
So what needs to happen? We need to talk, we need to agree. Agreement number one is the curfew is a good idea given our economic circumstances. Secondly, we need to give Kenyans the leeway to be able to meet the curfew without chaos.
Based on what you're saying, Mark, would you then say the curfew is not well thought about in terms of bringing all the stakeholders on board, like the employers, for example, making sure everybody knows that you have to leave by at least 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. to be able to make it at home at 7? Do you think was it then the curfew, was it then implemented in the wrong way?
Yes, it was. And you have to look at it, the whole spectrum. Look at matatus. The matatu owner has to make a decision when his last ride to town and back is. And in Kenya, that's not a fixed time. So you can imagine a lot of matatus shut down too early. But also, NYS buses were still at NYS. Army buses still in the army.
Okay.
Diplomatic buses still in the diplomatic car parks. What does that tell you? That we did not consider the plight of the guy who has 30 shillings only to get him from town to home. And when there's no matatu, what is he going to do? But at the same time, let us not forgive the Kenyans who had a car and we could see them driving 10, 11 p.m. when they knew the curfew was at 7, thinking that their car is the exception to keeping to the law. So you've got to balance it. You've got to talk to Kenyans, you've got to talk to police officers, but you've also got to tell Kenyans that what they're doing is not acceptable, because there are some people who flaunted the curfew simply because they thought they could.
All right. Wanakili, what is your take on this?
But you've also got to tell Kenyans that what they're doing is not acceptable.
Thank you, Ben, and good morning. I think
simply because they...
I think what we must put it outside there is the issue that the existential threat to humanity currently is coronavirus. It is not the Kenyans who are not beating the curfew, the 7 p.m. curfew. What we need to put into context is this, and our police must listen to us. We have not suspended the human rights of Kenyans. We have not suspended the Constitution. We are not in a state of emergency. They should differentiate between a curfew and a state of emergency. The other point they need to relate is that if we do not have enough matatus, Kenyans who are working in industrial area cannot walk all the way to Kayole. They have to find a means to home. So we need to tolerate Kenyans at some point, because some of these problems are problems that have not been brought about by the Kenyans themselves. Why are we not asking? The person who brought the virus is not a Kenyan, is not a person in Kayole. It came from our borders, which ought to have been manned by the policemen.
All right, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, KIPCHUMBA. Many of us, a lot of Kenyans have never experienced a curfew, a nationwide curfew at that. How should it be implemented? And does it mean that some laws are suspended? There has been something doing the rounds on social media that of what you should do as a Kenyan if 7 p.m., the clock hits 7 p.m. and you're still not home. What should you do?
What has happened, Ben Kitili, is that there is no law that has been suspended. The Bill of Rights is still reigning. The Constitution is still in place. What we are asking and what should happen is this. By 7 p.m., every Kenyan should be at their house or the place they have decided to abode for that day. And what the police should do is not to come and be the judge, the jury, and everything and start punishing Kenyans with a penal punishment. They should arrest Kenyans or issue any or give them a bond so that we take these people to court. And also, Ben, there is also an issue here. We cannot classify or fail to classify legal service as an essential service and expect that the rule of law will remain as is. We know that we still have a colonial mentality within our police force. People who still think that police is a force. It changed, it's now a police service. And what we must do from where we are now is to make sure that everybody, the police enforce the curfew with civility and in the firm way. And the Kenyans realize that we have a curfew for a reason. The curfew is not there as a cosmetic purpose. It is there to enable or to enhance the issues of fighting coronavirus. Any other attempt on any other thing will be counterproductive. Lumping together Kenyans, beating Kenyans with those sticks, we might be spreading corona faster than if we had not even developed the curfew. And on issues of taking accountability, we need to tell Matiang'i, Karanja Kibicho, Inspector General Mutiambai, and the police, the individual police officers, that when it comes to taking individual responsibility, it will not be Matiang'i who will be taken to IPOA. It will not be Mutiambai who will be taken to IPOA. It will be the individual police who will be taken to IPOA. And as a policeman lifts the rungu up, they should know that they are lifting their career. Because nowadays, you cannot evade a camera. You cannot beat a Kenya mercilessly without a camera capturing you. So we should ask ourselves, this is a curfew that has been brought about to enhance social distancing. This is a curfew that has been brought about to enable Kenyans to stay away from each other so that the spread of this virus cannot be further than what we have currently.
Thank you, Kipchumba.
By undoing whatever has been done.
Thank you. Chero, be that as it may, what Wakili is saying, that it is the individual police officers who will be taken to the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. But where does the buck stop in this? Who takes the ultimate responsibility? Is it the CS Interior Matiang'i? Is it the Inspector General of Police?
I'll take it further back. It starts at State House. And what I've said about the coronavirus from the very beginning is information around it has been shrouded in secrecy. For example, we discover or learn that 7,000 people are currently in quarantine. We learn bits and pieces of information. This is a space where then rumors are rife. And when rumors are rife, people disbelieve. When people disbelieve, they refuse to cooperate. And when people refuse to cooperate, you have anarchy. And when there's anarchy, the police jumps in. Because if I'm told there's a coronavirus coming for me and I must go home at 7, and be home by 7. Let me use a real example. My name, Cherotich, it means I was born in the evening when the cows were coming home. Now, if from time immemorial for my community, around 6 o'clock is when the cows are coming home. But suddenly I'm told, from today on, your cows must be home at 2 p.m. I will look and I will say, what do I have to do in order to have my cows back home at 2 p.m.? And you have to work backwards. It's about planning. It's about structure. It's about measures. And I might look and say, actually, it's impossible for me to have my cows home by 2 p.m. And if now I'm found with my cows out at 3 p.m. rushing to beat the curfew that was imposed on me and I'm beaten, where do you start? And I want to say, where is the church? The church is very good at receiving sadaka, very good at sanitizing corrupt operatives and so on and so forth. But where were they? Have they been called to the table? Religious leaders are a powerful tool for popularization and sensitization. And if they were involved, if there was a multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary approach to the corona response, we would not have the kind of violence that we are seeing today. And trust me, the virus will continue to spread when there could have been a way to mitigate. We are now talking, we're using the buzzword, flatten the curve. How do you flatten the curve when a baton, saliva, blood, sweat, everything is spreading all over the place while we are being herded to our homes, and people are rushing home to sit there and look at their children who are hungry, saying, Mama ulileta nini, Baba ulileta nini?
Dismas, is it possible for the police to enforce this curfew, which is very important? As the CS Mutahi Kagwe said yesterday, the government trying everything it can not to have a total lockdown. Is it possible for the police to enforce this curfew in a humane manner?
Well, it's very possible. It seems the case that the policemen who were sent out there to go and ensure that the curfew has been respected do not actually understand what they were doing. they do not understand what coronavirus is, and they don't understand the role of the curfew. So for them, as far as they are concerned, if you're not in your residence at 7 o'clock, you're going to get a beating. For them, that's their raison d'etre, that's their philosophy. That's why you saw them coming up with sticks. So in the morning when they were preparing to go for this curfew, for them, at the back of their mind, they knew we are going to clobber some human beings. We are going to beat people into a pulp. So they came from their barracks, wherever they were coming from, with sticks. And you know, we shouldn't condemn the entire police service. You saw a few ones who came to work with sanitizers, who came up with the soaps, and they were speaking to individuals. But for these particular people, they need to borrow best practices. You know, there's some sort of a curfew in the UK, in Italy, in China, in Japan, in South Korea, but the policemen are doing it under the direction of public health officers, and they know their role, that their role is not to catalyze the spread of coronavirus, but rather to break the chain. Now, when they understand that basic philosophy, when they understand the basic mathematics, then when they go to the streets, they'll behave like that Baringo policeman. When he meets people, he's telling them, tomorrow I want you to be home by 7 o'clock. But meanwhile, here is a sanitizer, because he understands his role. But some of these policemen who come up with some anger, it's as if for them, the job description is on the site of Mura, just knock her dead. That is unacceptable. But what's more painful, nobody has called them out from the command. The Inspector General has not said anything. Dr. Macheng has not said anything. The President has not said anything. So as far as the police are concerned, for them, wherever they are at home, they're saying these are best practice, and nothing stops them. So there must be that culture of consequences, that when you engage in this mischief, you suffer. I mean, you even seen a policeman beating up a journalist. A journalist merely doing his job, and then he's getting a beating at the back, and then he escorts him with a kick. What would happen if that journalist falls down, collapses, dead? And you know you spread the virus. So in my view, we shouldn't be handling the government with kid gloves. We must call them out. When they do a mistake, we call them out. But also on the individual, knowing that there is a curfew beginning at 7 o'clock, it's our primary responsibility to ensure that as much as possible we attempt to respect it, because we need to break that chain.
Mark, based on what Dismas is saying here, where does this leave essential service providers, especially our doctors, nurses, and other medical caregivers on the front line, who are supposed to, who have been doing us, some very good job going out there to try and stop the virus from spreading, and of course helping those who have been infected. Will this, put some fear into them as they, traverse this country, this city, trying to help those infected? Will they also be looking behind their back, afraid of the police? Is that a realistic fear?
It is very realistic, because, Ben, I'll remind you that if today you went home and your son is sick, you have no idea at all how to get them to a hospital, because you will be imagining that in times of trying to cover his fever by taking him to hospital, you and your son might be beaten by the police on the way to hospital. If you look at Dubai, for example, and they have an equal curfew, how they've affected the curfew is they've given very reasonable ways by which you can exempt yourself from the curfew. You can apply online real time to be allowed to walk around in the streets, because maybe you have a sick case. I myself was not feeling too well on Friday night, and I can tell you I was completely scared to even try and drive out of my house, and I had to wait until morning to go seek medical attention. So yes, that fear is rife. But what is the solution? The solution number one is this: can there be identification of the people who've been exempted from the curfew? How do we know them? Do they have badges? Do they have identification? How do we know they're carrying out essential services? That's one of the things that the government has to do. The second thing that the government has to do pretty fast is to offer citizens a way of applying for exemption online, via phone, via USSD, via SMS, in case of emergency. Because we know, for example, a lot lot of people cannot afford ambulance services. So if a cousin of yours falls sick and they need you, you're the only cousin in Nairobi with a car, how are you going to reach them unless there is a form you can give and say, please, real time, I need to run to this place to go pick my relative who's sick, to drop them at hospital, or there's been a robbery, I need to go help. So there needs to be a system by which people can access legal exemption from these curfews. I disagree, however, that Kenyans should be arrested. This is the worst time to put 3-4 people in those airless, non-ventilated cells that we have in Kenya and across Nairobi. I think, again, this is the time to put hefty fines for breaking curfew. These people should be given spot fines so that we are not congesting our court system either. Spot fines of 5,000, 10,000 shillings, and that should be incentive enough for people to stay at home. And guess what? It's also a very good way for the government to raise income. That said, I must commend the changes that I saw yesterday evening. If you saw the pictures coming out of Likoni Ferry, people keeping their distance, people walking and the police not harassing them, that was a good thing. There were less cases of violence yesterday. So in as much as we are against what happened on Friday, we must commend the changes that have happened. May they continue to be so. But more than that, the government needs to actually take steps in ensuring that people are safe. And one of those ways is, can there be badges? Can we get information on how we can apply for exemption?
We continue to take exception in the manner in which, or in those instances where police are seen to be heavy-handed in trying to enforce the curfew. At the same time, commending those police officers who have been doing a good job in trying to let Kenyans get home safe, and of course safe from the virus itself. And those Kenyans who have been very keen to keep the time and make sure they're home by 7 p.m. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Inside Politics. When we come back, we'll talk about this curfew some more. There are some Kenyans who have been opposed to it, saying that it is not enough, that the virus does not sleep, does not sleep during the day, so it should be a total lockdown. Do you agree? Let's talk about that when we come back.